Hi, this is Richie Rigs, where I'll build your computer live and make sure you know exactly what's hot in technology. Hi, this is Richie Rigs, and today we're going to look at something that's been on my mind a lot lately. I think it's important to be able to digest the information, which can be very dense about performance these days. And I'm here to help you make the best decision when it comes to purchasing computer parts. Graphics cards are among the most desired and most interesting components in the computer, and of course near and dear to my heart, and I think a lot of you can relate. Entire builds revolve around the graphics cards, and it's the driving factor in a performance across the board. So let's take a moment to look at what I find to be a couple graphics cards that people are buying, and this information might make you want to reconsider. So I'm going to focus this video on the 4070 Ti and the 7900 XT, because I see a lot of PCs being built in various places. I'm quite frankly a bit shocked how many people are choosing to buy these graphics cards. It's not because there's any fundamental flaw with them, they just exist in a position that questions their value. There are a lot of good benchmarks from Gamers Nexus that are accurate and reliable that show exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm going to be digesting the information from there to help you understand the decision-making process that I have when it comes to buying one of these cards, or any card for your computer, for a matter of fact. So before we get into the details, I want to start by explaining the way I approach purchasing decisions and what makes a graphics card a good value. What's most important is the experience. Numbers only tell one story, and it's a good story, but it's not always so simple to understand what will actually happen in real life. What I mean by that is a few things, but the biggest question is if an upgrade will actually be noticeable to you. In some cases, it may mean that a particular graphics card may appear to perform better than another on paper, but in reality, the experience may have more frame skips, or feel worse, or look worse than you might have expected. I'm going to cover all these details as they arise, in all cases, whenever I talk about something like this. But what's important to keep in mind is that I'll always base my decisions on how the money spent will ultimately deliver on the entire performance of the system. Comparing single components to each other often isn't simple enough, and we need to consider all the factors at play. Like when you consider buying a graphics card and you don't match it up with a good processor or something like that. Anyways, there's a common range of prices for graphics cards in 2024 and also the recent past, which can help us get a gauge on where we might want our performance to land, right? When you see a card that's $300, $400, $500, the more price goes up, you expect more performance, and a lot of times it's in our minds that it's going to be linear, and it's not usually linear. It's always different, and you can see regularly from Nvidia and AMD that there are 3 or 4 specific price classes when it comes to new GPUs. Typically they have 3 or 4 strong flagship models for those price ranges, and the low end usually coming around $300, the mid-range coming around $500, and we've come to expect around $800 for a high-end card. And then as of recently, we've got some really crazy top-end cards that are pushing the envelope real hard, $1,000, even $2,000 sometimes for 4090. But what many may not realize is the dollar to performance value at each tier isn't consistent, and sometimes it just downright doesn't make sense. So let's get into that. I'd like to go over the whole range of GPUs in general, but I'm gonna save that for another video. I'm making another video about the modern history of graphics cards, so you can get the kind of knowledge that I have over the long period of time that graphics cards have been in the market, and know where and how they jump and what value they offer. But what's important for this video is to know that for the most part, spending as much as your budget allows is probably a fine decision, but you and I both know how desirable the latest and greatest are when it comes to building a new PC, and what most people are going to aim for. So let's just pretend I'm a new buyer. At the entry point, you might consider a 4060 Ti, but it looks a little bit underwhelming at $400. And so the next option is a 4070. But wait, for how much? $575? What? Yeah, okay, that's a big jump in price. And I know it is actually justifiable, but with a big gap like that, I can just see the confusion of buyers on what to do. And then you've got AMD with their 7800 XT for $500. Well, ouch, that's even worse performance than 4070, so that won't do. So what's the next big upgrade? A 4080? And that's $1,300? So what the... Well, that's absurd too, for most people, I assume. A lot of people don't consider spending that much money on the graphics card. And then AMD has the 7900 XTX for $1,000, and that also probably seems a little bit crazy to some people, but it's kind of more in the range where people are a little more acceptable. It's a little more acceptable, especially because those cards do deliver pretty good performance for the price, right? They're really good cards. But sitting there, what do you do now? You don't want to settle for a 4070, because that feels too mid-tier, and for a lot of people, 4080 is just out of the question. But right, there's the 4070 Ti and the 7900 XT. They're $800 and $700 respectively, and that's kind of the place where most people have become comfortable spending a good amount for their graphics card. It feels right. And I think it feels right because you remember the 1080 came out a long time ago, and even before that, the top end cards were sitting in that $800 range. And so people get used to that, and they're comfortable spending that amount of money, and it's competitive at that price point. When you consider consoles and everything else that comes into play, $800 feels about right. Until the 20 series came along and screwed all that up. So those might be good, right? You would think those might be good, but I really don't think so. And I think a lot of people look at the price and all those factors, and they think that's the way to go. But the reason is there are still some new cards that we haven't talked about. And that's the 4070 Super and the 4080 Super. And you've got the 78900 XTX as well. When you kind of get into this area, is we're talking about that $800 to $1,000 price range where people really want to land, or $700 to $1,000. That's where everybody's really hype, I feel like, on getting a really sick graphics card. So you've got the 4070 Super coming in somehow lower than the regular 4070, coming in at $550, and it delivers a lot more performance. I really like this card. It's a really good card. And similar things happen to the 4080 Super. It's $1,050. There's one model from Asus, the $1,050 model. That's a decent bit faster than a 4080. And that's a good card if you've got the money. You've also got that 7900 XTX that I was talking about here, and you can sometimes find that as low as $900, and that's a really good card as well. So why not get the 4070 Ti or the 4070 Ti Super or the 7900 XT? Well, we need to look at the data to truly understand this. There are some implications with this data that I have. These tests aren't exactly the same kind of tests I would use to represent real-world settings in these games, but they do a really good job, and it's a good enough job to portray the story here. So let's start with this graph from Gamers Nexus showing the 4070 Ti Super with 172 FPS average and 145 1% lows compared to the 7900 XT with 184 FPS average and 158 1% lows in Resident Evil 4 at 1440p. If you don't know what 1% lows are, they help us determine low spikes in the FPS, which will represent how choppy the frame rate might feel, how jumpy the image might look. It might not be smooth if the 1% lows are too low. But these cards don't really have too many issues with that. And if there is, we'll see it. And I already looked, there's nothing to worry about there. So we're not going to take too much time to look at the 1% lows, but just keep that in mind, something to know. And then we take a look here at the 4070 Super, coming in at 142 FPS average and 121% lows. So you see those numbers and you see a difference in performance. It's meaningful statistically, but what's the gameplay experience different here? In real life, 172 FPS and 145 FPS aren't really that far apart to the eye. If someone upgraded from a 4070 Super to a 4070 Ti, I'd be unsure if they'd really be able to tell the difference in most games. Like, that's more than enough performance, honestly. I'm pretty sensitive to FPS, and I can't tell too much between 120 FPS and 175 FPS, at least on my OLED. And, I would say, if you have an IPS or a different kind of monitor, I actually think there's a big issue using those monitors, because having higher FPS on those monitors does make them look better. But if you have something like a good OLED, you don't have that problem. You can run a lower FPS and have a smoother, better looking image because the pixels are just so fast. So that might be the difference here that makes people really desire that extra little jump in FPS, but we'll get to that in another video. But even still, for $300 for that much more FPS, that's not a lot. That's not a lot of FPS for $300. And, the 7900 XT here does look a little bit better in this test, which does continue to trend pretty well because of its price right now at $700. It used to be $850, which is pretty sour. I could never have recommended it there. But even at $700, I still don't think it's really worth it over the 4070 Super still. Especially when you consider all of NVIDIA's features over AMD. It's actually really important to realize how powerful NVIDIA DLSS is, and not just in performance, but in quality. Side by side, it's actually very meaningful. But if you did want that jump in performance, a meaningful jump in performance, the 4080 Super, which unfortunately is not shown here, but you can assume it's a bit better than the 4080, and the 7900 XTX here, both actually give you a noticeable improvement in performance. If you want that experience today, you want that next gen experience today, you want more FPS, and you're already ready to spend that $300, get those cards instead. The 4080 Super and the 7900 XTX are a good experience. They're really good. That's a big jump from the 4070 Super. So let's take a look at this next graph here. In Dying Light 2 at 1440p, we've got the 4070 Ti coming in at 130 FPS average and 115 lows, the 7900 XT at 134 FPS average with the 117 lows, and you've got a 4070 Super at 111 FPS and 98 1% lows. Again, that's a 20 FPS difference, a 111 to 130. I don't really think that's enough to notice you're already in a good place. It just isn't worth the price difference. And you can kind of see what I was saying again before about the 4080 Super and the 7900 XTX here. They give a lot more performance that makes it worth it. You can see the same thing here again when we look at Tomb Raider. You've got a lot of the same, 205 and 172 on the 4070 Ti, 217 and 177 on the 7900 XT. Well, you've got 191 on the 4070 Super, 191 FPS average. Tell me you're gonna notice the difference between 191, 205, and 217. It's just not there. Same again here in F1 2022. The 4070 Ti's coming in at 227 FPS average. Got the 7900 XT at 248. And then the 4070 Super putting up 197 FPS. Now, with the 7900 XT here, I can understand that a little bit more, but still, you're at 197 FPS. I'm not seeing the difference between that and 250, and I don't think you too are going to see that problem. You're going to see a difference. And I don't think I need to go through the rest of the graphs here to make my point. The 7900 XT might be an acceptable choice if you really don't have more to spend and you really want to get that little bit extra out of your system, because it does do a little better. It's actually a better value, especially a better value over the 4070 Ti, but in the end, I'm still not going to recommend it. You'll almost certainly be just as happy, if not happier, with a 4070 Super. It's a really good card. And if you don't have the money to go to a 7900 XTX or a 4080 Super, you'll be happy you got that 4070 Super too. You know, if we're going to talk about that high-end performance, because to me that 4070 Ti and the 7900 XT are just kind of off the table, so there's not a lot of options between the 4070 Super and the next step up. So if you're going to choose to save your money, invest more in the rest of your computer, get a better monitor, get that 4070 Super, do that. But if you got the cash and you want that more performance, let's talk about the 7900 XTX and the 4080 Super for a second. Just really quick, because that can be a really difficult decision. The 7900 XTX delivers really good numbers, but I just don't think the visual quality and the performance difference is meaningful enough for the 7900 XTX. So I'd still be getting a 4080 Super, and that's mostly for the better DLSS, the frame gen, all the other NVIDIA features, but most specifically because at that level of performance, the 4080 Super can actually do ray tracing pretty well, and it's amazing if in the games that support ray tracing. And so you might trade a small performance difference in games that don't have good DLSS, but in my honest opinion, it's gonna feel better to play in most games, just because the DLSS features are higher quality than AMD's FSR. They just look better, and they're more well done. And unfortunately, that's kind of what's holding AMD back at this exact point. That 7900 XTX could be a banger, and it's really good, and I might still consider having one, but if it's really coming down to exactly where you want to spend your money, I'm probably still getting the 4080 Super. But this video is not really about that. What it's about is the 4070 Ti and the 7900 XT. So please, don't buy the 4070 Ti or the 4070 Ti Super. They're really just not a good value. And the 7900 XT comes a little bit closer to being a better value, a better purchase, but it's still just not a transformative difference for the money over the 4070 Super. Similar to the 7900 XTX, I think in most titles, the 4070 Super just feels better to play on than the 7900 XT because of the higher quality features. I've seen it myself, and that DLSS is a big deal over FSR. So that's about it for this video. Leave your comments down below about your GPU experiences lately and your thoughts about the 4070 Ti or any of the graphics cards you have some feelings about. I'd love to hear from you. As always, I'm looking forward to building more computers live on this channel, so please check the link in the description if you'd like to get a computer from me. I guarantee it'll be the best money you ever spent on a computer. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and get subscribed so you don't miss any of my content and are entered to win a free PC as soon as my channel hits 5K subs. It would really mean a lot to me. Thanks.